If you said to me to describe this story, I would say, don't believe it, but it's true.
I can't even imagine somebody doing something like this.
It's also the perfect crime, because sometimes the thing that's blatant right in front of your face is the thing you don't expect.
I was going to be $1 million winner.
I was game for something exhilarating.
From 1989 to 2001, there were almost no legitimate winners of the high-value game pieces in the McDonald's Monopoly game.
Uncle Jerry told me, if you want a game piece, this is how it's done.
Hi, I'm James Lee Hernandez.
And I'm Brian Lazarte.
We are the executive producers and directors of McMillions, a new 6-part documentary series on HBO.
McMillions is the story of the McDonald's monopoly fraud case that happened in the 90s, where basically every person who came forward to claim a prize from 1989 to 2001, $25,000 or above, turned out to be a part of a criminal ring to defraud the game. And the whole syndicate was taken down by the FBI in a massive undercover operation. This podcast, we wanted to serve as a companion piece to the series to talk about many of the things that we found to be incredibly interesting that we just didn't have a place for in the body of the series itself.
And give us a chance to talk to many of the subjects from the show to see how they react to seeing the show itself.
If you haven't had a chance to watch the episode, please do that first.
Mega spoiler alert. Many a spoiler beyond this point. Yeah, and so some of the things that you'll learn specifically in today's episode, we'll be diving a little bit deeper into the FBI's investigation. We'll learn more about how McDonald's actually became involved with the investigation, which is just still a mind-blowing fact. And then we'll reveal something that such a huge thing and such a ridiculous thing that almost derailed this entire investigation before it got started.
Chris Graham, who was the squad supervisor for the white-collar division in the FBI, he's actually going to be joining us in just a few minutes. We're also going to learn a little bit more about Shamrock Productions.
My favorite.
All right, so let's get into the episode.
This is the McMillions Podcast, Episode 1.
For those people who don't know how we came to this story, James, could you share with them how this story came to be?
This all started with me laying in bed late one night. This is in 2012, cruising Reddit, as I'll do right before I go to sleep. And then I saw a TIL. Today I learned nobody really won the McDonald's Monopoly game. And when I was growing up, I was absolutely obsessed with that game as a kid. I was obsessed with McDonald's in general because my first job ever was when I was 16, I worked at McDonald's. And so I immediately tap on the article, and it's just a local Jacksonville newspaper blurb that's not very long about it. It set me on fire. I needed to know everything about it. I couldn't believe I didn't know about this thing. And it happened through the entire time that I played the game and even worked at McDonald's. So I looked more and more into it, really couldn't find a lot. I was very surprised. Finally put a Freedom of Information request in with the government. That took a little over 3 years to go through. And then once I was able to get the information from the government, I was able to find out what agents were involved, the federal prosecutor. Then I was able to get permission from the FBI to talk to the agents. I reached out to them, and they were all very welcoming, and I was shocked when they were saying things like, this was our favorite case we ever worked. No one's ever contacted us about this. I started to see how big this story, this thing could be. And that's when I thought of my friend Brian here. What was going through your mind when I first reached out to you about this?
I mean, it's gripping. Like, I played the game. The documentary meter in my head was saying, like, okay, how are we going to approach this as a story? Like, is it a feature-length story? Does it warrant that? Is this just a short, little fun story? These guys had an incredible wealth of material, far greater than what we had imagined for the story.
It's still mind-blowing to think about. It feels like it was yesterday and 10 years ago.
So now let's bring on one of the guys who helped tell this story, Chris Graham. Chris was the FBI squad supervisor for the white-collar division in Jacksonville.
I don't think anybody had really even seen anything like this before. So there's always a risk that I turn these guys loose on this, and turns out it's not true and that I've expended resources. But, I think we all realized if this is true, this is big.
Chris Graham, thank you for joining us on our first podcast. Hopefully we're not screwing it up too bad.
You're not supposed to tell him that. You got to Doug Matthews it. You got to pretend like you've been there.
Yeah. What's the Hollywood saying,
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah, fake it till you make it.
So we've been doing this now for years. Thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to start off with the main question that we've been dying to know. Now that you've seen the first episode, what do you think?
I had no idea that what we were doing was so much fun. I don't remember having quite as much fun as Doug Matthews seemed to be having throughout the whole thing. The undercover operation, that was fantastic, and kind of brings it all back like it was just a week or so ago.
You have such an interesting role within this. You're managing an entire department of white-collar crimes, and you have so many different personalities to deal with as a manager. What is it like as a boss dealing with Doug Matthews?
When you say Doug Matthews, it's Doug and Rick. I describe them, kind of as the odd couple of the FBI. When I took over the squad, I never heard much from Rick and Doug. I've come to find out, obviously, that what these two were doing was, basically working their tails off on all kinds of cases.
Doug mentions working healthcare fraud, and he's not very excited about it. But how do you assign what cases happen?
He was no fan of healthcare fraud. Doug, as an accountant coming in and being thrown back into healthcare fraud, was not his vision of the FBI. I'm sure if we go back over his career subsequent to McDonald's, he probably did work. In fact, I know he did work a lot of other healthcare fraud cases. So his complaining about it then was obviously just a temporary complaint.
Plus, it doesn't seem to mesh with his hyperactive personality.
Yeah. Like I said, who knows what he was treated for as a child in a medical setting? So maybe some scars there that we don't know about.
What is Doug's wife like?
I would suspect that Deb, his wife, spends a lot of time rolling her eyes. I think if I had to draw a caricature, it would probably have to be him laughing or doing something silly, and her being the respectable suburban mom rolling her eyes.
Well, what's interesting too, though, is that Doug is quite brilliant. He came to the FBI as an accountant with an economics degree, and teamed up with Rick Dent, who is a mathematician. So these bright guys. Rick Dent was the senior agent who, in the series, we did not get on camera, and Doug Matthews was the rookie FBI agent.
A pair like that on a squad is a godsend for a supervisor like me. Obviously, you see Doug as the ultra excited, new, and enthusiastic agent. I said he could have, if he didn't make it as an FBI agent, he could have been on an infomercial selling some new kitchen knife in the middle of the night or something.
He could still do that, actually.
He could still do that. And I said someday I'd like to meet Doug's mother, because I picture him as a child in his house, where his mother would hear him laughing in his room and think like, what's going on in there, and come in and find him alone telling himself jokes and laughing. And meanwhile, you've got Rick Dent, who I would almost describe him as kind of the military equivalent of like the senior enlisted, almost like a master sergeant. He's really the guy who everybody goes to find out how things really get done. He's very quiet and measured, restrained. just patient and dogged and deliberate about what he was doing. And, to pair those two up and have, that excitement and energy and almost to some degree of creativity coming out of Doug, matched up with that level of experience and expertise that Rick had, the end result is obviously a case like this.
Rick Dent, however, although we mentioned that he declined to be interviewed, we actually did have a chance to meet with him on several occasions.
When we met up with him, I could feel him evaluating me, like am I a threat? Like what's happening? I could see what was going on. Like I would hate to be on the other side of this table with him if he came to see me for another reason.
Rick Dent was really gracious with us in regards to his time, wanted to help us. He just didn't want to go on camera. And well, he said that the reason why he didn't want to participate in the documentary was mainly because there's a lot that he doesn't remember, and he didn't want to get any of the facts wrong. And he said that, the only way that he'd really be able to feel comfortable talking with us is if he broke out all his old case files and reviewed the case. And he said the thought of that actually, gave him heart palpitations.
One really huge thing with the investigation and with the show is that meeting with McDonald's that you guys put together. What is it like to be in that room when that's happening?
It was almost a kind of a blind date situation where we wanted to come across as professional as we could. We wanted to convey a message that we had confidence in what we were saying, and that we could protect their interests.
How did you feel seeing Doug in his gold suit that he wore that day?
Yeah, it was pretty gold. I remember the gold suit, but it definitely came back seeing it in the episode. I had seen it before, and quite frankly, I'm sure I had made many jokes about it being made out of curtains. I think for McDonald's, whether they remember it or not, I think it was for them an indicator of things to come with Doug. Within
that same meeting, the Assistant U.S. Attorney Mark Devereaux, he wears a black or pinstripe double-breasted suit every time I've ever seen him. How is it working with Mark Devereaux and then with his personality and dealing with Doug in a situation like that?
I think Mark, if you could see, inside his mind, the cloud of what he's thinking when Doug walks in, it would probably be Mark Devereaux choking Doug and ripping his gold suit off and tying it around his neck. That would be what Mark was thinking. Meanwhile, with Doug, the same cloud, he's laughing out loud because he knows he's got under Mark's skin. And and that was the dynamic with the two of them that just would go on and on and on. Almost like a fraternity brothers messing with each other.
There are a lot of things within the FBI that people just learn from movies and assume those are real. One of those things is how you guys tap a phone line. It would be great if you could just explain what goes into that.
I think there is this misconception that we just, whenever we want to, we flip on a switch and start listening to everybody's phone calls. You basically have to show that there is probable cause, that there is a crime being committed, and more importantly, that these particular phones are being used to facilitate that crime, effectively a search warrant of that phone.
Sean O'Donovan, who is one of the FBI agents who we interviewed, who did not appear in this episode, had a couple things to say about this as well.
This is actually one of the deleted scenes from the show.
In the wire room, we had there had to be one agent per line. We were up on 3 lines at the beginning and 4 lines after a month. And all that was there were these machines that had the tapes in them. And that's how old school this wire was. We were using cassette tapes, not even, not the old fancy reel-to-reels, but just old cassette tapes like you put in your car before CDs. And you'd sit there and wait for an interesting call to happen. And it would ring, and you would listen for up to 2 minutes, and there were time limits depending on how the judge required it. And then if it was a call where it was a pertinent call, where there was information about the crime being committed, you could listen to the rest of it. After 2 minutes, if there was nothing bad on the call, you would minimize it, which means shut it off, wait for another specified period of time, a minute or two, and turn it back on and listen to see if they've changed the topic. And they were still talking about things that had nothing to do with the crime. You shut it off and keep doing that, coming back in, listening, and turning it off again. What we specifically listened for were conversations between Jerry Jacobson and his associates, or to people that they were grooming to be winners. I know they were doing all those undercover interviews, and they were interviewing the winners, and we got to see some of them that were pretty funny. What we call tickling the wire. That's where you do something to one of the subjects you're listening to invoke him to make a phone call about it. And there's all sorts of different ways to do it. A visit from the FBI is a great one, and you specifically want to listen, hey, who does he call right after they leave? He gets nervous, someone comes to talk to him about it, the first thing he might want to do is call one of his co-conspirators. So that's called tickling the wire, and I know that they did that several times during this case.
Chris, Sean talks about tickling the wire. So what really goes into putting something like that in action?
This concept of tickling the wire, usually it's more commonly done when the wire is less than productive, and you may be reaching a point where you need to cause something to happen that gets discussed on the wire. In a way, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword too, because if your plan to quote-unquote tickle the wire is flawed and the bad guys figure out what's going on, you're listening to them talk about how innocent they are and how they've done nothing wrong, and you're stuck with that. It's not something to be done lightly, and certainly it's not something that you would cross the line in any way that starts to move into that entrapment area that we strive to stay completely away from.
This entire investigation was almost stopped before it started due to something with a wiretap.
This is one of our favorite deleted scenes, actually.
So there's this order that needed to be faxed over to the phone company in order for the tech guys to get plugged in. We sent it across to this company, which turned out was located in Atlanta. I want to say within an hour, our phone rings from a phone company who's like, uh-oh, I think we might have a problem. Turned out of all the phone companies out there, that Jacobson's wife, current wife, was the administrative assistant to the person in charge, president or owner of that particular phone company. Her function was to go over to the fax every day and pull off these faxes. But fortunately for us, she had taken off that day. Somebody was sick in her family. She was off. And so we sent more than a few people from the Atlanta division. We found out all this stuff about, yes, she hasn't seen it. No, I have it. She's not going to see it. It's all good. So we're lucky on that particular set of circumstances, because before we got started, it could have been killed. God, I can imagine, like, what a big blow that would have been.
To quote Doug Matthews, how crazy bullshit is that?
As a supervisor, what is your reaction to that? Who do you blame? Like, what's happening?
I blame Doug Matthews 100%. No, it's just these things. It's Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and then even the outliers happen, and it kind of comes with cases. If you go through a whole case and things like this don't happen, well, all that means is that something happened and you didn't, you weren't aware of it. Thank goodness in this case, we became aware of her being out that day. Had she taken it, who knows how we would have handled it. We dodged a bullet.
What would have happened if she actually would have received that?
If she was smart, she would have kept a low profile, processed it, and then told him. We'd have been 10 days into the wire and had to shut it down because it would have been silent. He probably wouldn't have even gotten on the phone. We would have figured it out, and then we'd have been forced into a very forward-leaning interview strategy, try to knock out some search warrants, cooperative witnesses. I mean, you got at this point 20, 30, 40 different winners, recruiters in the middle. Somebody's going to flip. It just would have been nearly as fun, and would have taken a long time.
This fax that went to the phone company where Jerry Jacobson's wife was working, there's no way that you could have predicted that. Or, I mean, I guess like in due diligence, you could have done research and learned about Jerry Jacobson's family, significant other, and found out that she worked at that company.
This is 2001. There is such a massive difference now between what you can gather online about subjects of cases and others, and what there was back in 2001. Yeah, in 2001 there was a few databases here and there that you would check, but a lot of this was phone calls and physical surveillance and things like that. So I would venture to say that had this case been going on today, the preliminary workup and the investigation into Jerry Jacobson through social media and the things that are available now online may very well have disclosed that his wife was an employee at that phone company. I'm speculating. That's just such a fundamental difference between then and now.
So what other isms do the FBI have? I mean, tickling the wire, when we first heard that, thought,
This sounds so awesome, like straight out of a movie.
what else do you got?
It's good. I got to think about that. There's probably a whole book of them.
There's something you mention in the show, and we actually never really talk about it, but you mention a 302.
Yeah.
What is that?
The long and short of it is a report of an investigation. So you could be a victim, let's say. You've been a victim of a check fraud case. I come out, I interview you, and I take notes, and I come back, type up a report of that investigation, and it's a summary of that interview. In a fair amount of detail. It's not a transcript per se, but it covers all the relevant facts. It identifies who spoke and where we were and the date and whatnot. A good FBI file has a lot of FD 302s in it, a lot of interviews. It could also include the service of a subpoena or a surveillance that's conducted. Really anything we do should be documented on a 302, and there's a skill in writing them. I think as Doug will attest to, early on in our relationship, I went through a lot of red pens on some of Doug's work products. He used to accuse me of bleeding all over them.
And I think you told us at one point, Rick Dent, his 302s were the template that the FBI would follow almost.
Rick Dent really was the standard by which anybody in that office or any white-collar agent, if you wanted to learn how to write a 302 on a white-collar case, you could look at anything that Rick had written.
Doug's undercover operation was obviously something that was incredibly effective and everybody got behind. But did you ever have a chance to go undercover yourself?
What Doug did was, we would call it a cameo appearance. What that means is it's kind of a one-time, one or two times, very short duration appearance, as opposed to somebody who is a certified undercover agent. They go through an assessment, they go through a school, that becomes a key part of what they do every day. So a one-time cameo, every FBI agent or most of them do a little of that, one or two times here or there. They need somebody to kind of step in as an accountant for a day or a meter reader, things like that. And we all kind of did a little bit of that.
Yeah, what were you?
What was I? I was a meter reader.
Really?
Yeah. Go around and it's a way to hang around a neighborhood without causing a lot of alarm.
Wow. So Shamrock Productions got started. I know you got a kick out of the name. Do you have any idea how that name came to be?
When Doug and Rick came to me with this idea of a production company to go out and record these winners, retell their story, we all thought it was a great idea, and they came up with the name Shamrock Productions, 'cause you're just lucky. I don't know how Doug came up with that.
We were actually surprised to find out as well the origins of Shamrock Productions. Amy Murray, who was the marketing executive at McDonald's, actually had a great personal story, and this was one of the deleted scenes from the show.
Doug loved naming everything something with McDonald's. And so he named the production company Shamrock Productions after Shamrock Shakes. And that was really ironic for me because actually Shamrock Shakes are how I came to McDonald's. I'm from Philadelphia, and my dad used to work for the Philadelphia Eagles, whose colors are green and white. And so he had contacted McDonald's about doing a fundraiser to raise money for this house for terminally ill children. And Shamrock Shakes were the promotion at the time. So he's like, I'll give you players that have green jerseys on to promote this if you give some of the money to this house for terminally ill children to stay while they're being treated. And McDonald's said, we'll give you all the money of Shamrock Shakes if you call it the Ronald McDonald House. So it's sort of the whole start of the Ronald McDonald House story. So when Doug told me that he decided to name it Shamrock Productions, I was like, wow, that's unbelievable that you would pick that name.
With you guys working with an entity as large as McDonald's, what goes into that?
This was different because you had a billion-dollar company, a Fortune 100 company, presumably as a victim. Usually in white-collar cases, you have, the victim is the government. Government programs are defrauded, or innocent people, elderly who are defrauded. And in this situation, with a company like McDonald's, we had to be cognizant of their reputation, of their brand. We understood early on that they had some potential legal exposure down the road from disgruntled folks here and there. We ultimately had to come into a partnership with them and tell them what we could without going overboard, and we kind of expected the same thing from them. We got a obviously critical cooperation and information.
With them agreeing to work with you, it felt similar to what it took for them to agree to work with us on the documentary series. Why do you think they did it?
When they say that we as a company needed to do this because it was the right thing to do, that we owed it to our customers, I absolutely believe that. That was a constant theme throughout, our dealing with them. In that initial meeting, and there was always this outside possibility that somewhere within McDonald's, there might have been somebody who, knew of this or was part of it or was working, helping Jerry. They realized it. We realized it. The games made a lot of revenue for them. They were popular. It would make no sense for them to in any way arrange for winners not to be winners. So, we put that aside pretty early, but, there was always this on both sides, particularly their side. There'd be somebody on the inside that was involved. And fortunately for them and really everybody, that was not to be.
In this particular case, the decision to work with the FBI had to happen really quickly, like within a matter of days. And that's just not how they operate. But it was Jack Greenberg, who was the CEO at the time, really initiated this need to participate immediately.
The head of McDonald's security, Rob Holm, he was in the room in Jacksonville when you guys first laid everything out to him. He was a big proponent of, we should do this.
Their decision of really almost to partner and help us and work with us in the case, their understanding of our need to go into a proactive mode on the case and continue and do the wiretap and the undercover, that they had enough experience to see that, hey, without that, you've really got a quarter of a case that may or may not make it. And we'll leave a whole lot of questions unanswered, and culpable people may slip through. They understood that it was not a frivolous or over the top request, and that there was a legitimate investigative and legal need to do it.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. This has been so great.
It's great to go back and relive it. So appreciate you guys giving me the chance.
And are you enjoying your retirement?
No. I miss it. Definitely miss it.
Thanks for taking the time. We're excited to see what you think about the rest of the series.
Yeah, likewise. I'm looking forward to it.
That's it for episode 1. That was a lot of fun. We're excited about next week's episode where we introduce the criminal side of this story,
including how the mob got involved.
If you have any questions about this episode or any future episodes coming up, please contact us.
McMillions podcast at HBO.com. McMillions spelled with an S and not the $, which we have everywhere else on the internet and in the real world.
If you want to record your voice and email it, we can actually play your question on the show.
Don't forget to check out McMillions airing Monday nights at 10 p.m. on HBO. And see you next week for episode 2 of the McMillions podcast.
This podcast was produced by FunMeter in conjunction with Unrealistic Ideas. For FunMeter, I am Brian Lazarte.
And I am James Lee Hernandez.
Joe Fenstemaker produced this episode. Our consulting producer is Barry Finkel from Pineapple Street Studios. The music heard here comes from our actual series and was composed by Pinar Toprak.
Unrealistic Ideas is Mark Wahlberg, Stephen Levinson, and Archie Gibbs. And of course, none of this would be possible without the amazing support of HBO. You can find the McMillions podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, the HBO Go and Now apps, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening.